everyone.
Hey there.
Hi.
Not bad.
Hello.
Hi. How are things? Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Did anyone do the homework? Do you have any thoughts on that? Any things that were difficult, or do you have any questions maybe?
Just to say, I didn't get to it because I wasn't sure how to do it, but I did go back and review the video of the class. I was looking for an example of a test of what that might look like.
In the homework, you'll have a test that is already filled out. So the first test in till.test.js, that's a passing test that works. It's testing the sum function. You'll also have an example in the class notes as well.
For that second one, did you share the answers already by any chance? Because I said like expect price to throw error, but it doesn't want to work.
Right. So yeah, so if you want to know the solution or a potential solution, you can just have a look at the solution branch on that same GitHub repository. So I'll send a link after today's session in the Slack channel. But yeah, I don't really want to go through the homework during class time because it would take too much time. But yeah, feel free to drop into the Slack channel and we can talk about things. So, solutions. Good. Yeah. So yeah, especially if you haven't been able to get started, yeah, please come into the Slack channel and we can help you get started to make sure you can run the tests and that you understand what's going on. Yeah. Good. So good. Let me just share the URL in the Slack channel right now, and then I'll be right back. Okay, good. So let's get started with today's session. So today's session is about asynchronous programming. So this is a topic that is huge in the world of JavaScript. Not every language treats asynchronous programming the same way, but it's very, very important in JavaScript because we're basically forced to use asynchronous programming in a lot of situations, whereas in most other languages, you're not forced. You can, but it's not pushed onto you. So we are going to talk about asynchronous programming, what it is, and how to deal with it. It's something that is still evolving in the world of JavaScript, but there have been some really interesting developments in the last few years, and we're gonna look at some examples, and you'll see how difficult it used to be maybe to write JavaScript and how easier it is now. But yeah, the first thing is to understand what we mean by asynchronous programming. So let's start with a code pen. Okay. So here I have a code pen. Let me go into. Let me log in here. What can I do? So why? Let me try and log in quickly here. Okay, now I can debug. Good. So here I have a code pen. This is a simple application. Okay. There's a text box here. I can type something in here, so I am happy. And then the app is really simple. It's going to take that piece of text and it's going to exercise an API and give it that piece of text, and it's going to get a response from the API. And the idea of the API is to check whether the text is positive or negative. So I'm happy would be positive. I feel sad would be negative. And the role of the API is to kind of figure that out from the text. So here I'm going to try I am happy. I'm going to click the button here, evaluate valence, and there you go. So we don't have a result. We have a bug, as we would expect. And here it says cannot read property sentiment of undefined. Let me make this bigger. Oh, good. So we have this bug here. Let me just show you the code. There's a bit of HTML and CSS, but it's not very important. I'm just going to show you the JavaScript.
Hey Matt, can you minimize the Zoom window on your screen? Thanks.
I can. I'll just leave that here if that's all right. Good. Perfect. So here's the code. Maybe you can just have a look at this code for a few seconds and try and figure out what's going on here. And maybe you can already feel that there's a bug there. And then we'll come back to this pen after today's session. Yeah, so here I'm using jQuery's AJAX method to call the API. This is the API URL. And there's no trick, right? It's the right URL. And the response is correct. The request is correct and the response is coming back.
Can we see the response that came back in your network?
Yeah, I can show you that. So if I come here to the network tab, it should be in here. Here. So this is the request. Okay, let me try if I can. There you go. So this is the request, and this is the response. There you go. That's the data coming back. And here's the code again.
So your code looks right, that it should be response.result.sentiment. But that's happening. This isn't written asynchronously, so it's happening too quickly.
That's right. Yeah, it's very optimistic. Good. So we'll come back to this code afterwards. Excellent. So so let's just start with the easy question first. So what is synchronous programming? And the answer to that is basically everything. When you add numbers, you do 2 + 2, you get 4. When you call a function, all this stuff is synchronous. All right, so by synchronous, we mean it happens immediately. And whatever result comes out of that computation, if you call a function, you get the result right away. So in really practical terms, if you can write var value is equal to compute like this, so you're calling a function and getting a return value back. And then if you can print that value, then this is synchronous code. Right? Everything is happening immediately. You're never waiting for anything. Okay? So by default, most things are synchronous. And that's the usual way of things. Good. So what is asynchronous? So when we talk about asynchronous code, and you might have heard non-blocking code as well, I'm going to consider these two the same thing. So an asynchronous function is going to be a function that you call, and the computation is going to happen, but you can't just wait for it. It's not going to come back right away. So if you do 2 + 2, you get 4. That happens right away. But if you make a request, potentially to the server, then you're not going to wait around for the answer. The code's going to keep going, and you're going to have to say, okay, whenever you get the answer, run this function or do this thing, do this task with the response. Okay? And so that kind of code is asynchronous or non-blocking. Okay? And this is something that we have to do in JavaScript. We're forced into this paradigm because the browser basically has one JavaScript process to run your code. So if you didn't use asynchronous programming, if you were constantly waiting for things, the browser wouldn't have the bandwidth to do other things. So the browser is basically doing only one thing at a time. So if you send the request to the server and then wait, it might take a few seconds, and then the browser can't do anything else. It can't scroll. It can't accept a click. It can't do anything, and that's a terrible experience. Right? So we're forced into this asynchronous paradigm. So let's have a look at a few examples. So the first one is the AJAX request. So this is a request to the server, and as we said, you can't just wait around. You have to keep going and ask the browser to process the response later whenever it comes. So here's a simple example here. I'm using jQuery, that's the $, and I'm using get. So this is basically making a get request to this URL. Okay, and the second parameter here, the function, that is the response handler. Okay, so I'm asking the browser to make that request, get the response, and whenever you have the response, just run this function and give me the response as a parameter. Okay, so if you were to run this code, you would get a log statement here. It would say retrieving weather information, and then the request would go off to the server, and then you would get this log statement, request on its way. Okay, and at that point, the request might be gone, but the response hasn't come back yet. Right? And then the code could do other things here, and at some point, when the response does come back, then this function here would be called with the data. Okay, so here we're passing a function to be called later. We're asking the browser to call this function later, and that's how we bridge the gap between the normal synchronous code and the asynchronous code.
What part of that code is actually telling it to do it later?
Right, so we're not asking for it to be done later. That's just the way the jQuery API works. Right, so this function here, the fact that it's a function allows jQuery to kind of capture it as part of its state, and whenever that request comes back, it'll call the function. Right, so it's a bit of code that is encapsulated, that isn't run yet, and it can be stored as a variable, and then you actually execute it later. Does that help?
What that means is go Google jQuery and get.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Because like it's essentially a callback, but it's not a callback technically, right?
No, I would say it is a callback. Yeah, so it's a function that gets executed later.
Okay.
So yeah, so that is a callback.
And is data the variable it's stored in?
You're right. So data is the parameter that jQuery is going to give to you whenever the response comes back. So jQuery knows that that you want to send a request out, and then when the response comes back, you're going to want the body of the response. So data is the content of the response.
Also, we can have a function name outside of that thing, right, after the URL, and then we can reference that function name after as a callback, right?
Yes. So definitely. So some of these things are just using the fact that functions can be passed around. So if I do var callback is equal to function, here I can say console log, so logging from the callback. Okay, so here I just declared a function, okay, and it's stored in the callback variable, okay, and then if I just want to call the function, I can just do that. I can do callback parentheses, and it's going to call it. Okay, I can also pass this function, this callback function, to another function. So let's say I have a function that doesn't do very much except for executing another function. So I'll just create a function that accepts a callback. Okay, I'm going to call this CB, and then here, and then let me call this execute callback. Okay, and then within that function, I'm just going to call the function. Okay, so this function doesn't do very much, but it does accept the callback and executes it. So it's the simplest callback execution mechanism that I can think of here. Okay, and if I want to call that function and pass in a function, I can pass it the callback that we created earlier. Okay, then this function, execute callback, will receive a function and call it. So this is not something that you see in every programming language, but we're actually passing functions around. We have functions stored into variables and passing those around. So a lot of the asynchronous programming is based on this idea. Yeah. So
Is that called as the functional literal when you do that, when you store into the variable a function?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what a function literal would be. Yeah. But I'm just storing it into a variable, and you don't have to. You can also refer to your functions just by name. So function. So here's another. Okay. So here's my function. It's just gonna print something. Okay. And if I just do another, that's my function. So I can pass it around. I can give it as a parameter to another function. I can call it later. I can schedule to call it in a second from now. Okay, I can basically play with this variable like a variable. It's not special. Yeah. And if I want to call it, I can just add parentheses whenever I want to call it, or I can do call. We'll talk more about call later. But yeah, so the idea is that functions are just objects like any other, and you can pass them around, and you can call them now, or you can postpone their execution and call them later. So the browser has code, like a special API for you to say, okay, make this request, and whenever the response comes back, execute this function. And that function is a response handler. It's a callback. All these terms are alternatives. Good. So yeah, so this is just one example of many. It tends to be the one that you see all the time. Almost every application has to talk to the server. So we see that all the time. But there are many other examples of asynchronous programming. Another that we see often is add event listener. Okay, so you have a document and you want to run some JavaScript, and there's going to be some dumb manipulation. So maybe you want to add a form element, or maybe you want to hide a button, or maybe you want to show the rest of the page because the user scrolled down to that point. All right, so you want to do certain things on your page, but maybe the page isn't ready yet. All right, so if you have some code in the head of your document, for example, that code won't be able to manipulate your document right away because the browser just isn't ready for that. Right? So what you want to do is ask the browser to run a certain function whenever it's ready. Okay, so instead of executing code right away, you ask the browser, okay, can you add this event listener for me? Whenever this event is fired, DOM content loaded, just run this function. Okay, and that's just a way of asking the browser to run the function later when the DOM is ready to be manipulated. So this is the same thing as using jQuery's ready handler, and it is a form of asynchronous programming. The function here, that's a callback. It contains code to be executed later. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that can be more complicated, right? If certain, like, I know a lot of people when we introduced ourselves said they work in WordPress. So you might have that event DOM content loaded triggered before the whole entire page is loaded, though, correct?
So yeah, loaded is actually a technical term. So loaded means something else. But once the whole HTML is parsed by the browser, that's when this event is fired. So once this event is fired, if you select an element, an HTML element from the page, you'll find it. It'll be there. But that doesn't mean that the images are there. That doesn't mean that the size of the images are calculated. There might be things missing.
There's a difference between page is ready and page is loaded.
What right? So ready is more of a jQuery thing, so I don't really want to talk about it.
Okay.
The big difference is DOM content loaded and unload. Those are two different events. So you have load and DOM content loaded. DOM content loaded is the first one. That just means that the HTML has been parsed. You can select elements and you can change it. That's fine. Unload means that the images are in, the size are calculated, and so in general, the layout of the page is much more solid. So yeah, so usually you'll want to use DOM content loaded because that's really what you care about. So after the DOM content loaded event is fired, you can attach other event handlers. Maybe you want to react to clicks, and you can do various things there. You don't necessarily need to know that all the images are loaded, and you don't necessarily need to know the sizes of different elements. Good. Let's just move on to this next example here. So one consequence of this single process in JavaScript is that if you have something heavy to compute, you basically have a problem. If it takes you a few seconds to compute your result, then you're not going to want to do it in the browser, because during those few seconds, the user won't be able to click or scroll or just interact with your page. So one way to fix this is to use web workers. So I'm just going to set up the example here. Here, okay. So let me just take this. Okay. And so here I have an example so the example tries to calculate the Fibonacci sequence. Okay, so it's just a mathematical sequence of numbers, and there are different ways to calculate the sequence. Some are better than others. For this example, I'm not using a very good algorithm, just to take more time. Okay, sorry, I'm gonna have to actually run a server. Okay. Good. So here so this is the app, right? So when I click the button here, it's sending a message to the worker, and we're going to get a result in a couple of seconds. Good. So this is the time it takes for the calculation to happen. All right. So the code is calculating the sequence of numbers 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. If you've had job interviews, you might know this sequence already. But it's just a mathematical sequence that we want to compute here. And if I were to do this in the browser, during the time that it takes to compute, so I'm clicking now, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so we have about 6 seconds of computation time. And during those 6 seconds, if this were normal code, I wouldn't be able to interact with the page. It would be a terrible experience for the user. Yeah? To fix that, we come here. Not here. We come to, well, actually, let's have a look here. So this is the source of the page. Yeah? So here, I'm just declaring a worker. So I'm saying new worker, worker.js, and then the worker.js file is going to be my web worker, and then that's going to allow the browser to actually compute the sequence outside of the normal JavaScript sandbox. So there's a bit of code here, but I don't really want to get into web workers. This is just an example of asynchronous programming. But basically, I'm saying to my worker, I'm saying my worker post message. Okay, so this is me sending 40 to the worker as an input to the algorithm. And then I'm saying on message, so whenever you're ready, whenever the sequence is calculated, just call this function E. And then here, I'm just printing the result to the document. Right? So this on message API here, this way of registering a function, that's the way we do asynchronous programming with web workers. Right? And then we can have a quick look at the web worker. Let's see. So it's just here. Up. Okay. So here you have an on message function, and that's basically going to get called whenever the main script sends the 40 input to this algorithm. Okay. And this is how I'm calculating the sequence. Nothing too interesting here, just that it takes a few seconds. Okay. So this is the browser, the main sandbox interacting with a web worker asynchronously, and then you can keep the user experience fluid as you do this. Good. Let's just quickly move on to the next example. Good. So the other example is animations. This one's fairly visual. So let's have a quick look at this pen. So here, let me maximize the JS. Good. So I have a bit of text here, okay? And I would like to click the remove button and see the text slowly disappear. And then when that's done, I would like to actually remove the text from the page. So the first step is going to be to have it fade out and slowly disappear. And then I actually want to remove the HTML element from the document. So right now, if I comment this out, okay, if I click remove, right now you should see the text fading out. Poof, now the text is gone. But if we had a look at the HTML, we would see that the text is still there. So it would still take up space, right? And it's generally something to handle. Right? So I don't want to do that. I actually want to remove it from the document. So I'm going to uncomment this line here. I can show you the HTML. Good. So this is the text. Okay. So the button's here, the text is here, and all the text is in this div with ID animated. Okay. So here in my JavaScript, when I'm done with the animation, I'm calling remove text from document, and that function just selects the animated div and removes it from the page. So this is what I want to do, but of course it's a bit naive. We'll see why. Let me click this remove button, and now it went away instantly. Right? So we've lost the animation. Okay. So why is this happening? It's happening because the animation is asynchronous. So when I start the animation just gets started, but it's going to take 3 seconds before it's done. But the code isn't going to wait. Right? So the code is going to move on to the next line, and then it's going to remove the text from the DOM, and then it's gone, and then it's basically as if there were no animation. So yeah. So does anyone know how to fix this?
I know how I usually do it. I don't know that it's the right way.
All right. How do you usually do it?
Callback function after 3000, you can call the function remove text from document in that.
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, the easiest way is to use another parameter here. So we just want to pass in the function. Notice I won't put in parentheses here. Okay. I'm just passing the function as a callback. And so that's part of jQuery's API. It's just going to take that function and call it at the end of the animation. So let's just confirm that it works. Let me click the button now. And the text is fading out, and now it's gone. So I'm going to have a quick look here, make sure it's gone. Actually, something I can do is just this animated. Yeah, it seems to be gone. So that works well. Okay. Now we can do this because we know jQuery's API. Let's just quickly see another way to do this. So if you had your own custom animation, you could do something like that, like the following. So I'm going to use set timeout. Okay. So this is a global function. And I'm going to say, I want you to call remove text from document in 3 seconds. Okay, so I'm basically asking the browser to run this code in 3 seconds. That's all this is doing. Right? So the animation will have time to complete, and then it'll be removed from the DOM.
And that works here because you know exactly how much time. It's not a variable time.
Correct. Yep. So if you didn't know, you would need some help from the animation library. You would need a way to pass in a callback, or maybe you would have an event that gets fired by the animation when it's done.
Hey, Matt. Question, what's your take on using set timeouts? Should the use of timeouts be restricted or avoided?
Yeah, I mean, it's useful sometimes, but it's true that there are usually better alternatives. All right, so if you look at request animation frame, that's usually a better option, but it really depends on what you're trying to do.
Okay.
If you want to show a message to the user, like, hey, you've been signed in successfully, welcome back, right? And if you want to remove that alert after a couple seconds, set timeout is perfect. That's not a problem. But if you're animating something, And if you want to reach like 30 FPS, 60 FPS, then you're definitely going to want to use request animation frame.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Good, but it's a really simple way to schedule code for execution later. So you call set timeout, you give it a function that gets called in 3,000 milliseconds, so 3 seconds. So this is the simplest way to understand callbacks. Good. So this is also a good tip, right? Whenever you animate something out, just remove it when the animation's done. Don't leave it on the page. Otherwise, your page is going to get bloated. It's going to accumulate stuff. Good. So that's just another example of asynchronous programming. So let's talk about callbacks, right? So in all these examples, we've used callbacks. So callbacks are just functions that are scheduled to be called later. So you'll see different patterns. We've seen like some examples from jQuery where the last parameter is a callback and that gets called later. So you'll see that quite a bit. You'll also see the following examples. So if you're using Node and you're writing some backend code, you'll see things like this. So here I'm requiring the FS module, and I'm just trying to read a file from the file system. Okay, and that operation is also asynchronous. So I have to pass in a callback. That's the function here. And then it's conventional to have the callback accept 2 parameters. One is the error, if any, and the second one is the actual data that you're looking for. And then you'll see this a lot where programmers go, if error, do this, otherwise continue and actually use the data.
Are you saying that's a convention to have 2 parameters of FS, or just in general of all callbacks?
Yeah, I'm looking at this this parameter list here. So your callback will be called with these 2 parameters. The first one is an error, if any, it might be null, and the second one is the actual data you're interested in.
Thanks.
So the FS module will follow that convention, and you can write code like this. So if there's an error, handle the error, otherwise do something else and actually use the data. So this is very conventional. You'll see this a lot in Node code. Another convention, you'll see this a lot in jQuery, is instead of having 1 callback with 2 parameters, you actually have 2 callbacks. So one is a success callback. If everything goes well, that function gets called. The other is an error callback. If there's an error, that function gets called. So here I'm using the Ajax function, and I'm specifying a success function and an error function. So if the network is down, for example, this function will be called, and if we actually get a response from the server, this function will be called. Good. Any questions on this?
When would you use one of those over the other?
Right. I mean, the short answer is I wouldn't use either. I would use promises. So callbacks are the way we used to do things, and they're still useful as a concept, and they are used by promises, but you probably want to upgrade your code to promises and generally use promises on your projects. So I wouldn't really choose between these conventions. I would just use promises.
We're about to hear what promises are.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Good. So that's nice. So we can schedule code later, and then we can continue to do various things while we're waiting on data from the server or data from the file system, or while we're waiting on the user to do something. We can keep working and actually run code and schedule code for later. The events that the browser is firing are helping us to do that. That's nice. But if you end up writing complicated code, you probably will realize that actually callbacks are difficult to reason about. It's usually you would expect each line to kind of get executed in turn. Right? So you would expect this line to be executed, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one. and then this one, and then this one. But with callbacks, this idea is not appropriate. With callbacks, you have functions that get defined, but they get executed later, and that can be confusing, especially when these callbacks start interacting with one another, or when you start having 2, 3, 4 callbacks. Then it gets hairy. So promises are a construct that's been created on top of callbacks to make a lot of the asynchronous code that we use a lot easier to deal with. So it's a higher level abstraction. Good. So let's see. Yeah. All right. So maybe we can disrespect callbacks a little bit here. One problem with callbacks is that different libraries will implement callbacks differently. Right? So jQuery does it one way, the FS module does it another way, and then it's hard to know how this particular library will handle your callbacks. And so you kind of have to learn everything for every module. Right? So it's inconsistent. Right? And then the way these callbacks are handled can also be inconsistent. Right? So you could have a callback that you expect to be asynchronous that is actually synchronous. Right? So an example would be if you had a library that makes AJAX requests to the server. In the case where when the network is down, you might make a request and then expect your callback to be asynchronous, but actually the library might see, actually network's down, I can't do anything. So I'm just going to call this error callback right away. And then this immediateness of calling the callback makes it synchronous. So your callback is being called right now, not later. You can do that yourself. That's actually what we did in the example that we had before with the execute callback function. We were just calling the callback. Right? So this was not asynchronous, even though there was a callback involved. So callbacks can be both synchronous and asynchronous, which is confusing. And then we'll see an example as well of, let's see, add an example. Yeah, there you go. Good. And then we'll see other examples of why callbacks are not so great. But that's the gist of it. So callbacks are inconsistent, they're hard to trust, and complicated to work with. So promises are different. They are always asynchronous. There are no questions. They just are and always will be. And they are useful because you can chain them. So you can do one thing and then say, okay, once that's done, do this other thing. And then you have one API that you have to learn for all time. Right? So whatever module you're using, whether it's jQuery or something else, you can just use promises, and that's going to work the same everywhere. Okay. Good. So what are promises? So it's not so unintuitive, right? So a promise is it's a promise. It's an object that represents a value. Okay, so the result of a computation, and the value might be calculated in the future. So it might not be there yet, or it might have been calculated some time ago, and it might be there. You don't know. It's just a promise. At some point, you will get a value. Okay. So the promise can be in 3 different states. So it can be pending. So the computation is happening, or we're waiting on the server to come back. We're just waiting, basically. Or it can be fulfilled, which means there were no errors, and we now have a result. Or it can be rejected, which means there was an error. We can't give you a result. So if the network's down, your promise gets rejected. If the request to the server goes well, your promise gets fulfilled, and you have the response data. And if your request is going to the server or coming back but not there yet, then your request is pending. Good. So let's see. So this is one example of promises. Okay. So here, so this is the AJAX example again. So here I'm using the fetch API. So this is a global function, and it's basically an API very similar to the AJAX API, but it's more modern, it's simpler, and it's based on promises. So here I'm asking the browser to fetch this URL, and of course the response that comes back is not the response, right? Because the request is going to go out, and it's going to take some time. and then we actually want to keep going. We want to keep executing code. We can't wait for this response. So the return value of calling fetch is a promise object. So with this promise object, I can do various things. One thing I can do is call then, which will register a callback. So I'm saying fetch this, and then once you have the response, run this code. And here I'm just taking the response and asking it for its content as JSON. All right, so that's all I'm doing here. And then the result of that then will be another promise, okay? And that is P object. All right, so the P object represents the JSON data from the server. Whether it's there or not already, it doesn't matter. It just represents this object, and then you can pass that around. You can chain it. You can compose it. You can just treat it as the actual data. It just might not be there yet. Right? So it's a really useful abstraction. It makes the code a lot easier to think about.
So what format would the data be in prior to being transformed into JSON format?
It would be text. So just a string. Yeah, I mean, in this case, I'm using JSON. If you're not using JSON, you don't have to do this. Good. So once I have this promise object, I can do other things. So here I'm chaining another callback here. So I'm taking the promise. I'm saying, okay, good. I'm going to take your data, and then I'm going to go on the page and actually show it. So that's one thing I'm doing here. And then I don't have to cram all the things I want to do within one callback. I can just do this one thing here. And then later, I can register another callback here. And then here, I'm doing another thing. I'm adding an admin button onto the page. Okay, so this is just an example. And here, I'm also returning the promise. Right? So whoever is calling this code, whoever is calling fetch user, can also have access to this promise and chain more things after this. So here, I'm actually calling the function let promise equal to fetch user. So that's my promise object again. And here, I'm not satisfied with all the things that happened in the function. I actually want to do a bit more. So I'm chaining another callback with then, and I'm logging the data that I received.
I have one question. When you chain promises, does when you chain promises, like does the next promise that you have is it depends on the data of the other one? The first promise has to finish resolve first to go into the next promise. Is that how it works?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. Yeah. So if this fetch promise didn't work, then this promise wouldn't run. Yeah. This is assuming that everything's fine. And if there's an error here, it would actually throw an error. Okay. So P is the result of this promise here. It's going to be the JSON. I mean, P is going to be a promise, but the value of the promise is going to be this JSON data.
But as soon as that is fulfilled, then these next two p-thens will run simultaneously?
They won't. Nothing runs simultaneously, basically. So it's part of the world of JavaScript that everything runs serially. And as soon as it's fulfilled, they will run one at a time, probably in the order they were registered.
So from a user experience, we would see the button appear after the data was displayed, for instance?
I think so, yeah.
And to get these, like the then function or whatever, you have to, like, are you requiring promises or something, like in that module?
What do you mean by acquiring promises? Like,
are you requiring it to be able to use the .then?
I see. No, I'm not requiring anything. This is using the standard promises.
It's just available like out of the box.
Yep. So you have the promise standard, which is available almost everywhere now. Yeah, there used to be a time where we had a lot of promise libraries, and yeah, if you're just getting started and you have normal like standard promise needs, you can just use the standard promise. It works well. It'll give you all these things and quite a bit more. Until you're doing really advanced promise manipulation stuff, you won't need a library.
So I was understanding this, that each then would not start until the previous promise or previous action on that promise was completed, but you said that these thens might happen in the order they're listed. How is might used?
Right. Yeah, that's definitely what I would expect. But so you have to pay attention to the way the thens are used. All right. So here, so we have two examples here. One is fetch and then. All right. So fetch returns a promise, and then I'm calling then on that, and so the result is a promise. Okay.
If I deleted the P and put, can I do blah 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 then blah 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 dot then and chain them that way by dotting continuously, and then one has to finish before the next?
Correct. Right. So when you chain them like that, one finishes before the next one.
Okay.
When you do that, you're basically saying that the first promise is a dependency to the second one, and probably the result of the first one will be passed in to the second one. And it's probably because you have this need that you're doing this.
Okay.
But in here, I'm declaring P here. So this is what I'm doing here. So before I run this, I actually need the response from the server. Right? So that's why I'm calling then on this promise returned by fetch. Then the promise that I get here, that's the result, and I can declare multiple callbacks on this one promise. Right? So these two callbacks are not linked; they're not dependent on one another.
They're not chained.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool.
So it matters a lot whether you chain them like this or whether you declare a variable that contains a promise and then call then a couple of times on it.
Okay.
Yeah, good. And so the really good idea here is that we have an abstraction that represents a result, and the result can be there now, it can be there later, or it can be in waiting. Right? So this abstraction is really useful. So let's compare callbacks and promises. So here we have an example, again, using Ajax. So we have this fetch with callbacks function. We're calling this API endpoint, and on success, we are going to accept the data coming from the server, and we are going to make another Ajax request. Okay, and once we have that second response, we are going to show a summary. So the idea is to show something like a Twitter summary for a user. So we want to go fetch the followers and then fetch the tweets, and then we want to show, okay, you have 10 followers and 20 tweets. That's the goal that we're trying to do here. So let's see this code working. Okay. Sorry. I'm just going to run the server for the API, and then I'm going to copy this here. Beautiful. Okay, so this is the app. Right? So it's just showing a Twitter summary. It's pretty simple. Let's have a look at the network. Oh, I'm going to refresh here. Good. So we can see here the browser is loading the index.html. That's the first thing. And then it's loading jQuery. And then it's loading Twitter summary, which is our code. And then you can see these two requests, one to followers and one to tweets. And then so the first one is giving us a follower count of 543. That's what we have here. And the second request is giving us a tweet count of 3211, which is what we have here. So this is working well, and it's using callbacks. So let's have a look here. This is the actual code. So this show summary function here isn't very interesting. It's just taking the two counts and showing them on the page. Right? So we're going to use that function in our fetch with callbacks function. And this is the code that we just looked at in the class notes. So when you look at this code, is there something jumping at you? Do you think there's something wrong with this code?
what method we are using here.
So yeah, so here, whenever the browser is ready, we're calling fetch with callbacks. That's going to call this function here. This function with promises here is, we're going to talk about it later. It's not being used right now. And then within the fetch with callbacks function, we're just using Ajax twice. So
I guess, oh, I was gonna say I guess. I would say, because like, oh, never mind, just go ahead.
Okay, let's just have a look at the timeline view.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
If you go back to the code, if it's saying go get the information for both, and once you have the information for both, then display it, rather than display as soon as you have any information. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the right kind of criticism, right? So you could improve this code quite a bit by just showing whatever information you have at that moment. So if you have the follower count, you could just show that, and when you have both pieces of information, just show them both. Right? That would definitely be a better idea. Yeah, but it gets even worse. Right? So if you look at the timeline here, I'm just gonna enable the timeline tab and then refresh. That's going to record what's going on for a few seconds, and then it's going to stop, and then it's going to show us what happened here. Let me zoom in into this section here. Okay, and then if we look at this report here, okay, I'm going to zoom in a bit more. What's going on here? Is it here? Yeah, there you go. Good. So this is the network area over here. So this tab is a bit complicated, but this middle section here, I'm going to actually try and do this. Good. So this section here, the middle section, that's the network log. Right? So you can see the index.html is being parsed and loaded into the page. That has to be the first step. And then once the browser can read this document, it knows to fetch jQuery. That's what this first orange box is here. And then it also fetches the Twitter summary file. That's the second box here. And then in that Twitter summary file, we're asking the browser to fetch data from the API. And that's what you see here. So this is the API request going to followers. Okay. And only when that request is finished does it go to the second request to see tweets. So here we see a major bottleneck. It's waiting for the first request to finish before going on to the second one. So the two requests are done serially, which is not necessary. You could easily send both requests at the same time and just wait for the response. So let's fix this with promises. So you could fix this with callbacks. It's just more difficult, and promises make that really simple. So I'm going to change this code to use promises. Fetch with promises. Good. And then let's have a look at this code here. So here we have, I'm going to start here on line 23. I'm using fetch, and you can see the same pattern that we had before. It's making the call and then converting the response to JSON. And it's doing that for the followers and for the tweets. Okay. And in my then here, I'm expecting the two pieces of data as parameters. And then I'm calling the show summary function. Okay. And I'm also using this promise utility, promise.all, which will take an array of promises and only call my callback when they've all resolved. So this all utility is taking all these requests, waiting for all of them to come back, and then, only then, it'll call this function.
So if you didn't do that, then it might finish the first one and go to your then, and it would say
That's right.
response 2 is not defined or whatever.
Well, if I had it then on my first fetch, I would only have access to that one response, and I couldn't just assume that the other response is also there.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Question, how would you handle an error on any of those fetches?
Yeah. So with synchronous code, you would use try catch, right? And with promises, you can do catch like this. So if you use catch at the end of your chain, you can pass in a callback here, and it'll be given the error. You can handle it.
On either of the promises array, right?
That's right. Yeah, only because we're using all. But you could also call catch here on each one and handle the error differently.
Thanks.
So that's how you would do that. It's fairly handy, and in most browsers, you will also get an error if you don't catch an error in a promise. So you'll have an uncut promise error in the console log, which is very, very nice. If you've used older libraries with callbacks, sometimes they would swallow exceptions, and then it's really hard to understand what's going on. But if you have an error in a promise, most of the time you'll get just more feedback as to what's wrong.
And Matt, you're trying here to wait for both of the responses to come back before you show anything. You can change it so that you can still kick them off asynchronously, but show them as you get them back as well.
Yeah, we could do that as well. So that was the good idea that we had before. We could chain a then on each one and then show the data as we get it. That would be the fastest way to show feedback to the user. But so yeah, it's a good idea, but it's not necessarily the point of this example. So yeah, I mean, if it's something you're interested in, you could try it maybe on your own.
Are you going to show that graph again? I'm assuming the two bars will be stacked as opposed to side by side.
That's right. Yeah. So that's the last step here. So I'm going to refresh and do it again. And let's close this and have a look at the network log here. Okay. Good. And you can see here the two requests are being made at the same time here. So in this case, the requests are really quick, and there's only a bit of data, and it's only on my local file system. So they're very, very, very fast. If you had more requests, or if the requests were actually going to a server, you could save a lot of time by parallelizing your requests like this. Yeah, so this is just an example of how using promises will make your life easier. And just in general, I like the look of this code here a lot better than the callback alternative.
So basically, when you use promise all and use a multiple requests, it goes one by one. I actually missed the earlier part. So.
Well, they're all going to be sent one by one, but they will be sent together. Right? It's not going to wait for the response, the first response, before sending the second one.
Okay, and what about if first one fails?
Right, so if one fails, then you would have to handle that error. So you'd have to come here and add a catch here.
Okay, so it like second one is dependent on first one if the first one gets failed?
Yeah, I think so. But you can, it really depends on your code. You can make choices here. If you don't want to bind these two promises together that way, you can also write code in a different way so that they're not actually dependent.
Okay, but usually like we in the page we have to use multiple promises like multiple requests, right? So what other way to have the promise where it's not dependent to each other, and if one gets failed, another should run? Is it any other way you have?
Yeah, of course. Well, so I mean, all you have to do is stop using all. Right? So if you just take that fetch statement here, then it becomes independent, and then you can add a catch here and handle errors here. Right? Okay. And then once that request is sent, then the code is going to keep going, and it's going to come here. And here you can handle errors differently if you want to, but you've just disassociated these two promises.
So basically, in the promise all, first one is like all are dependent to each other. If one gets failed, another gets stopped, right?
Yeah, it won't be stopped. Promises can't be stopped. They just go off, and you can't cancel them. But if one errors out, then your catch callback will be called, not your then callback.
Okay.
Yeah. Good. So yeah, there's also something. So there's something else about promises is that you get used to promise-looking code. So this might not look all that readable to you, but I think as you get used to it, it gets better. Whereas callback code tends to remain a mystery. So yeah,
Looks very promising, Matt.
That's right. Yeah. So promises are good that way. Good. So yeah. So I would encourage you to use promises as much as you can. Not rely on callbacks so much. If you're interested in making your own promises, maybe you don't want to just use a library. You want to actually make promises in your own code. You can have a look at this API. So you can new up promise objects. You can resolve them and reject them yourself like this. This code will look a lot more like callback code, but everyone using that promise code can use promises. So promises are, you can say promises are on top of callbacks. And when you offer a promise enabled, like a promise aware API, then your caller code doesn't have to know about the callbacks. Good, but so I won't spend too much time on this. And then you might have heard of async await, and this is a new feature that is slowly coming into browsers. It's not there yet, but it will probably be there maybe next year. And the idea of async await is to allow you to write synchronous looking code, but that is asynchronous actually. So you can use try catch, you can use return values and that kind of thing. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about ends up being quite different once you use async and await. But you don't have to use this. You certainly don't have to use that now. You can definitely wait 6 months to a year before you get into this. But if you're interested, and if you have a lot of complicated asynchronous code, you might look into this and find that it's very useful to your code base. Good. So let's just come back to the CodePen. So yeah, good. So this is our example. So yeah, does anyone have an idea what's going wrong here?
It's just can put a promise around the response, right? Am I thinking about that right?
Yeah, right. So yeah, as someone said earlier, this is treating the response as a synchronous animal. So I'm doing let response equals Ajax, and then I'm just expecting the response to be a response, which is just not the way this works. Ajax will return a promise, or I can also pass in a callback. Let's actually do the callback implementation first. So given that this is asynchronous, I can pass in a success callback. Okay, and this callback will be called with the data. And now everything I want to do with the data has to be inside that function. It can't be after down here. So I'm just going to take that code and move it up into this function. Okay, let's see. So good. So and then let me just remove this because it's confusing. Good. So here I'm just making an Ajax request. There's a success callback, function data, valence response. Okay, let me just call this response. It'll be easier. Good. And then we're extracting the valence and the confidence and showing it. Good. So let's see if that works. I'm going to type I'm happy here, evaluate the valence, and there you go. So that seems to work well. The request is made, the success callback is called, and this code is showing the right thing on the page. So this is neutral, apparently.
With confidence.
Yeah, result was neutral. Oh, that's a little sad. I am very,
Make it happier.
I'm very happy. Neutral. Oh man. So this maybe don't use this API in production. So this is an example of how to actually make this work, right? So we had to shift from a synchronous understanding of the code to an asynchronous understanding, but we're still using callbacks. Right? So let's just refactor it to promises. So let me just yeah. So I mean, does anyone know how to do this? How would you start to use promises here?
I'd fetch that URL first. I just copy what you did before.
Right. Yeah. I mean, using fetch would be probably a better idea. But we can also use promises with jQuery. That's not a problem. Yeah. So I'm just going to call the chain then here. So I'm making my AJAX call, and then I'm calling then, and then this will take a function. So we already have that response handler here. I'm just going to take it, ping, and put it here, and I can remove my success key here. Ping. Okay, and that's it.
So it's either upon success, do this, or it's once this is done, then do this.
That's right.
Both doing the same things, just in a different format.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
callbacks, like you said, are a little bit more unpredictable.
That's right. Yeah. There's something nice with being able to say like let request equal this, and then later on down the code you can say request then.
Yeah, I like that.
So you're splitting out your code, so you have smaller chunks to see.
Yeah.
Smaller
You
chunks.
can label things better.
Is that better coding practice? Like I would also stick that response function in its own variable and then just say then the variable, or is that too much?
Yeah, you can definitely go all the way. I think you can go too far in that direction, because you can always extract things and give them names, and it's a good practice for sure. But it does get a bit heavy. So you could have like a let response handler here, and that's my function. Oops. Let me do this. Yeah, okay, and that's my response handler, right? And then I can come here and I can say request then. Well, actually, let me call this handle response. It's gonna read better. Handle response. Okay. And then you have code that reads nicely here. It says request then handle response. Right? It's pretty neat. But it does mean that we had to read this and go through this first. Right? So if you're someone coming to this function and you're trying to understand the code, you kind of have to read this code and assume that it's going to be used later, which is a little strange. Right? So yeah, so it's a good idea to give things names, but it does break the flow of the program. Something else you could do, maybe I would vote for this, is to come here and then say function handle or something like this, right? So I'm just giving my function a name here. Right? So you can still carry information, but you're not breaking up the flow of the program. Also in stack traces, it'll say handle, which might be useful. Yeah, good. Let's just make sure this works. So yes, I am quite sure that I am very happy. Let's see if that's positive. Very good. Good. So this is working well with promises, right? So we've seen the error, the synchronous kind of understanding. We've seen callbacks and we've seen promises. Right? So I would definitely go with something like this with promises.
It looks nice.
It's quite nice. And then if you can just use fetch instead of Ajax, that's also better. There's also a bit of an edge case, which is that Ajax, jQuery's promises will be different from the standard promises. So they're going to work still, but I would prefer to use the standard promises and just not have any surprises. So yeah, if you can just get rid of jQuery, then that's good, and you can just use fetch. It'll be modern, it'll be nice and simple and promise aware, and you'll be using all the latest standard APIs. Okay. Good. Any questions on any of this today? Any final questions? No, good. All right. So yeah, don't worry too much about the homework. If you can do it, you can still do it. You can spend some time on that this weekend. As a rule, the lessons don't depend on each other. I mean, they tend to get more difficult, but you don't need to finish the homework by the next lesson.
Well, that's good to know.
You have, I shouldn't say that.
But you shouldn't have said that.
You can definitely work on the homework and come into the Slack channel, and we can help you there.
Great. Thanks.
Good. All right, thank you. And we'll see each other Tuesday at, I believe, at the same time. I think we still have another week of this daylight saving discrepancy. So I'll see you, but check the calendar invite to be sure. I'll see you Tuesday at the same time as today.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Great. Thanks.
you.
Thanks.